store, they would just be so amazed. They'd walk in there with their eyes would be really big and they would be so excited.
Yeah, they don't have big stores like this.
Your energy company does not want you to see this. While you are struggling to pay your heating bill this winter, 360,000 Amish people are laughing at the system entirely. They live in large family homes through brutal winters and pay up to 60% less than you do. No electric company, no gas provider, no monthly bill draining your bank account.
Women, they're not allowed to smoke, so they drink a lot of coffee, and the men do drink coffee too.
They have been doing this for generations, right under everyone's noses. And the secret has been hidden in plain sight the entire time. Every winter, millions of households across the United States watch their energy bills climb. Heating costs have become one of the most significant household expenses during the colder months, with the average American family spending somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 each winter season, just to keep their home at a comfortable temperature. Yet, tucked away in rural communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, a population of roughly 360,000 Amish people manage to stay warm throughout the winter while spending a fraction of that amount. They do this without modern heating systems, without electric furnaces, and without the kind of infrastructure most people consider essential for surviving a cold winter. What they use instead is a combination of heating methods that, in some cases, date back centuries. These are not primitive or ineffective solutions. In fact, several of them outperform modern alternatives in terms of efficiency, longevity, and cost. Understanding how these systems work is the first step towards seeing why they have remained in use for so long. The first method worth looking at is the rocket mass heater. Despite the name, this has nothing to do with modern technology. It is a wood-burning heating system that has been refined over many decades and is widely regarded as one of the most fuel-efficient ways to heat a space using wood. The core principle behind it is fairly straightforward. Wood burns inside a specially designed combustion chamber where temperatures reach high enough levels to convert nearly all of the fuel into heat. Very little is lost as smoke or unburned gas. Compare that to a traditional open fireplace where a large portion of the heat generated simply travels up the chimney and disappears into the outside air, and the difference becomes clear quickly. What makes the rocket mass heater particularly effective is the second part of its design, the thermal mass. After the heat is generated in the combustion chamber, it passes through a series of channels built into a large mass of dense material, typically cob, brick, or stone. This mass absorbs the heat during the burn and then slowly releases it back into the room over the following hours, even after the fire itself has gone out. The result is that a relatively small amount of wood can keep a room warm for a surprisingly long time. According to those who use these systems, a single load of wood roughly the size of what you could carry in one arm can produce steady warmth for anywhere between 12 and 24 hours. Some users report that switching to a rocket mass heater reduced their wood consumption by as much as 80% compared to a conventional wood stove or fireplace. In spaces up to around 2,000 square feet, these heaters are capable of maintaining temperatures in the range of 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The main requirements are a properly designed chimney to safely carry away combustion gases and enough space to accommodate the structure itself, which tends to be larger and heavier than a standard stove. The second heating method commonly used in Amish communities is the coal stove. This is especially prevalent in areas of Pennsylvania and Ohio where coal has historically been easier to obtain and relatively affordable. Coal stoves operate on a simple principle, but do so with a consistency that many find difficult to match with other fuel types. Once loaded and burning, a well-managed coal stove can maintain a steady output of heat for 12 to 24 hours without needing to be refueled. That kind of reliability is particularly valuable during the coldest nights of the year, when temperature drops are sharpest and the demand for continuous warmth is highest. In Amish homes, coal stoves are often installed in basements or on the ground floor, where the heat can distribute upward through the rest of the house. One technique commonly used alongside basement coal stoves involves placing ventilation shafts in the floor above. On particularly cold days, a small amount of water is poured near these openings. As the water evaporates in the warmth rising from below, it helps carry heat more evenly throughout the rooms above. It is a low-tech solution, but it is effective. In terms of cost, coal offers a fairly competitive option. In regions where it is readily available, coal typically costs between $100 and $150 per ton, and a single ton can heat a modest-sized home for approximately 1 month during winter. The main drawbacks are the initial investment, which can range from $1,500 to $3,000 for a quality stove, and the fact that coal burning produces more emissions than wood, making proper ventilation an important consideration. Coal also produces fine dust, which requires regular cleaning. Still, many Amish families have used the same coal stove for 50 years or more, which speaks to both the durability of the equipment and the cost-effectiveness of the approach over time. The third category of heating used in Amish homes covers appliances powered by propane, kerosene, or natural gas. At first glance, it might seem unusual for Amish communities to use fuel-based heaters of this kind, but the key factor is that none of these require electricity to function. That distinction is what makes them compatible with the Amish way of life. These heaters are straightforward in their operation. Turn them on, and they begin producing heat almost immediately. There is no warming up period, no gradual build-up. For someone coming in from hours of outdoor work in cold weather, that immediate warmth is a practical benefit. These heaters also tend to require less daily maintenance than wood or coal alternatives. There are no ashes to remove, no fuel to stack, and the general upkeep is minimal. Many models are portable, which means they can be moved to whichever room needs heating at a given time, rather than being fixed in one location. On the cost side, a typical Amish household might spend around $20 to $25 per month on propane or kerosene during the winter months. Prices can vary depending on market conditions, which is why many families buy in bulk during the warmer months when prices tend to be lower. Closely connected to the use of gas-powered heaters is the Amish practice of using their lighting systems as a secondary heat source. Because Amish homes rely on gas-powered lamps rather than electric lighting, those lamps produce a noticeable amount of heat as a byproduct of their operation. The most commonly used type is the mantle lamp, which typically holds 2 to 4 mantles per unit and runs on propane or natural gas. Research and observation of Amish living conditions suggest that mantle lamps can raise the temperature of a room by between 3 and 5 degrees Fahrenheit. That might not sound like much on paper, but in a well-insulated home where the baseline temperature is already being managed by a primary heat source, those extra degrees contribute meaningfully to overall comfort. Wall-mounted gas sconces play a similar role. These fixed lighting fixtures are placed throughout living areas and function as a distributed network of low-level heat sources. In rooms where the family spends most of their evening hours together, the combined output of several of these sconces adds up. Because the lights need to be on regardless, any heat they produce comes at no additional cost. A typical gas lamp might consume fuel worth around $15 to $20 per month, but that amount covers both the lighting and the supplemental warmth it provides simultaneously. The fifth and final active heating method used in Amish communities is the masonry heater. These are large, heavy structures built from brick, stone, or concrete, and they operate on a principle similar to the rocket mass heater, but on a larger scale. The fire burns in a small, enclosed combustion chamber at high temperatures, and the heat produced is drawn through a series of internal channels before reaching the chimney. Along the way, a significant amount of that heat is absorbed by the dense surrounding masonry. Once the fire dies down, the stored heat radiates steadily from the walls of the structure, often continuing for up to 24 hours before another fire is needed. The efficiency of masonry heaters is well documented. They extract a high proportion of energy from each piece of wood burned, producing very little visible smoke and leaving behind minimal residue, because they only need to be fired once or twice a day to maintain warmth. The overall fuel consumption is low compared to systems that require constant attention. Masonry heaters are typically positioned in central living areas where their surface temperature remains warm and even throughout the day. Some Amish families build benches directly against the heater, creating a naturally warm place to sit during the colder hours of the day. The steady, even heat they provide stands in contrast to the fluctuating output of many conventional heating systems, and their lifespan, when properly maintained, can extend across generations. Generating heat is only one half of the equation when it comes to keeping a home warm through winter. The other half is making sure that heat stays inside the building rather than escaping through walls, windows, floors, and ceilings. This is an area where modern homes, despite the technology available to them, often fall short. Insulation standards have improved considerably over The decades, but many houses built in the last 50 years still lose heat at a rate that drives up energy consumption significantly. Amish homes, by contrast, are designed and built with heat retention as a central priority. The strategies they use are not complicated, but they are deliberate, and the results speak for themselves. One of the most fundamental aspects of how Amish homes retain warmth is the way they are laid out. The floor plans tend to be modest in size, not excessively large, and structured in a way that allows heat to move naturally from room to room, without getting trapped or dispersed into areas where it serves no purpose. Unused space is one of the most common sources of wasted energy in modern homes. Large hallways, high ceilings, rooms that are rarely occupied but still need to be heated to prevent problems like damp or frozen pipes. All of these add to the heating burden, without adding proportionally to the comfort of the people living there. Amish home design avoids this by keeping the layout compact and functional. Rooms are arranged so that the most frequently used spaces are positioned to benefit most directly from the available heat sources, while less important areas are allowed to remain cooler. The central living area tends to occupy a prominent position within the floor plan, with other rooms branching off from it. This means that heat generated in the main living space naturally radiates outward into adjacent rooms rather than being isolated in one corner of the house. It is a straightforward approach, but it works consistently because it follows the natural behavior of warm air rather than fighting against it. Window placement is another area where Amish construction shows a clear understanding of how to use the environment to an advantage. South-facing windows are a standard feature of Amish home design, and their purpose goes beyond simply letting in light. During the winter months, the sun sits lower in the sky than it does in summer, which means that sunlight enters through south-facing windows at a shallower angle and penetrates further into the interior of the building. This is the basic principle behind passive solar heating, and it requires no fuel, no equipment, and no maintenance to function. The sun rises, the light comes through the windows, and the interior of the home absorbs that warmth. The effect is most noticeable on clear winter days when outdoor temperatures are low but sunlight is strong. In a well-positioned home with appropriately sized south-facing windows, the solar gain during the daylight hours can reduce the demand placed on the primary heating system considerably. This does not replace active heating, but it supplements it in a way that costs nothing once the house is built. It is a passive contribution to the overall thermal comfort of the building, and when combined with other heat retention strategies, it adds up to a meaningful reduction in the amount of fuel that needs to be burned each day. Ceiling height is another design choice that has a direct impact on how well a home retains warmth. This comes down to basic physics. Warm air is lighter than cool air, which means it naturally rises toward the ceiling. In a room with a high ceiling, a large volume of warm air accumulates near the top of the space, well above the level where the people in the room actually are. That warm air is not doing anything useful for the occupants, and it represents energy that has been spent on heating the upper portion of the room rather than the living area itself. Amish homes typically feature lower ceilings than the average modern house, which keeps warm air concentrated closer to floor level where it is most useful. The difference in comfort between a well-heated room with a low ceiling and the same room with a high ceiling can be noticeable even when both are maintained at the same measured temperature. The upper levels of Amish homes, often designed as lofted sleeping areas, benefit from this dynamic in a different way. Because warm air rises, the upper parts of the house naturally accumulate heat that drifts upward from the main living areas below. Bedrooms and sleeping lofts positioned above the central living area remain comfortably warm through the night, even after the fire in the main room has died down. The family members sleeping above are, in effect, benefiting from the heat that has risen from the activity and heating sources in the rooms below. This creates a natural temperature gradient within the house, warmer at the top, slightly cooler at the bottom, which aligns well with how the spaces are actually used throughout the day and night. Many Amish homes are also oriented to face east. This means that the front of the house receives direct morning sunlight, which warms the exterior walls and helps to raise interior temperatures during the early part of the day. Morning is typically the coldest period in winter, with temperatures reaching their lowest point around dawn before gradually climbing as the day progresses. A house that faces east catches the first available sunlight at precisely the moment when warmth is most needed. It is a small advantage, but in a system built on the accumulation of many small advantages, it contributes to the overall result. Beyond the structural design of the buildings themselves, the Amish make extensive use of thermal mass as a way of storing and slowly releasing heat. Thermal mass refers to the capacity of a dense material to absorb heat and hold onto it over a period of time, releasing it gradually rather than all at once. Not every material has this property to the same degree. Lightweight materials like wood or plasterboard absorb relatively little heat and release what they do absorb quickly. Dense materials like stone, brick, and certain types of clay behave very differently. They absorb heat slowly during periods when a room is warm, and they continue to release that stored heat gradually over the following hours, even after the temperature of the surrounding air has dropped. Soapstone is one of the most valued materials in this context and has a long history of use in Amish communities. It is a particularly dense natural stone with a high heat capacity, meaning it can absorb and store a significant amount of thermal energy relative to its size. Soapstone blocks placed near a stove or heater during the day will continue to radiate warmth several hours after the fire has gone out. Observations of Amish households suggest that soapstone can continue releasing stored heat for between 6 and 8 hours after it has been removed from proximity to a heat source. For a family that lights a fire in the morning and again in the evening, the stored heat in soapstone and similar materials helps to bridge the gap between those two burning periods, maintaining a steady ambient temperature without requiring continuous fuel consumption. Clay walls serve a comparable function at a larger scale. Interior walls built from clay or earth-based materials act as a slow-release heat reservoir for the entire room. During the hours when the heating system is active, these walls quietly absorb warmth from the surrounding air. As the room cools later in the day, the walls begin to release that stored energy back into the space. The effect is a more stable, consistent room temperature throughout the day and into the evening compared to what you would experience in a room lined with materials that have low thermal mass. The temperature does not spike dramatically when the stove is burning and then drops sharply when it is not. Instead, it remains relatively even, which is both more comfortable and more efficient in terms of the energy required to maintain it. Brick interior walls function in a similar way and have the added benefit of being structural, meaning they serve two purposes simultaneously. Stone flooring and ceramic tiles also contribute to the thermal mass of a building. Floors cover a large surface area, and a floor made from dense stone or tile material absorbs a considerable amount of heat during a warm day and releases it steadily as the temperature drops. In an Amish home, this is not an accidental feature. It is part of a deliberate approach to using the materials of the building itself as a passive component of the heating system. The overall picture that emerges from looking at Amish architectural and material choices is one of careful integration. Each individual element, the compact floor plan, the south-facing windows, the low ceilings, the east-facing orientation, the soapstone, the clay walls, the brick, the stone floors, makes a modest contribution on its own. But when all of these elements are combined in a single building, the cumulative effect is substantial. Heat generated by the active heating systems described earlier is not simply pumped into the rooms and left to find its own way out through the walls. It is absorbed, stored, redistributed, and released in a controlled and gradual manner that maximizes the useful output of every unit of fuel burned. This is not a new approach. These principles have been understood and applied for centuries in various forms across many different cultures and climates. What makes the Amish example particularly instructive is that they have maintained and refined this knowledge within a consistent community context, passing it down through generations rather than replacing it with newer systems that may be more convenient but are not necessarily more effective. The buildings themselves reflect accumulated experience and practical wisdom about how heat behaves and how to work with it rather than against it. When you look at the heating methods and design principles used in Amish communities, the natural next question is what all of this actually means in financial terms. The practical value of any heating approach ultimately comes down to how much it costs to implement and maintain over time. And on that measure, the Amish way of managing winter warmth holds up remarkably well against the systems most American households rely on today. The average American family spends somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 over the course of a single winter season on home heating. That figure covers electricity, natural gas, heating oil, or whatever combination of energy sources a given household depends on. It does not include the cost of maintaining or eventually replacing the equipment itself, which adds further expense over the years. Central heating systems, heat pumps, and modern furnaces typically require professional servicing and, depending on usage and maintenance, may need partial or full replacement within 10 to 15 years. Those replacement and repair costs are rarely small. Amish households, by comparison, spend considerably less. Estimates based on their fuel consumption and heating methods suggest that a typical Amish family manages their winter heating for somewhere in the range of $600 to $1,000 per season. That represents a saving of roughly 60% compared to the average American household. Over a single decade, that difference amounts to several $1,000s that remain in the household rather than going toward energy bills. The specific cost depends on which heating method a family relies on most heavily. Those using wood as their primary fuel tend to spend the least in direct monetary terms. A family heating primarily with wood might spend between $300 and $400 on fuel for the entire winter season. Much of the wood is sourced, cut, and prepared by the family themselves, which means that the cost in money is partially replaced by a cost in physical labor. The Amish themselves are straightforward about this trade-off. The time and effort involved in chopping, stacking, and managing a wood supply is real, but for households where that labor is available, it represents a genuinely cost-effective exchange. The wood warms you once when you cut it, and again when you burn it, as the saying goes in some communities, and that captures the practical attitude toward this kind of work fairly well. Families using coal as their main heat source typically spend between $500 and $600 on fuel per winter. Coal prices in regions where it is locally available tend to range from around $100 to $150 per ton, and a single ton is generally sufficient to heat a modestly sized home for approximately 1 month during the coldest part of the year. The initial cost of a quality coal stove, which can range from $1,500 to $3,000, is higher than some other options, but the lifespan of these stoves is long enough to make that investment reasonable over time. There are documented cases of Amish families using the same coal stove for 50 years or more. When you divide the cost of the equipment across that many years of use, the annual cost of ownership becomes very low indeed. Households that rely more heavily on propane or kerosene heaters typically budget around $700 to $800 per winter season on fuel. These heaters tend to have lower upfront costs, with basic models available from around $200 to $300, and their portability and ease of use make them a practical option for supplemental heating or for smaller spaces. The main variable is fuel price, which fluctuates depending on market conditions. Buying in bulk during the warmer months, when prices tend to be lower, is a common strategy that helps keep annual costs predictable and manageable. What these numbers illustrate is not simply that the Amish spend less on heating, though they clearly do. The more important point is why they spend less, and whether those reasons have any relevance for people outside those communities. The savings are not the result of living in unusually small homes or tolerating lower indoor temperatures than most people would find acceptable. Amish homes are family-sized living spaces that accommodate multiple generations, and the heating methods used are designed to maintain comfortable temperatures throughout the winter. The savings come instead from a combination of high-efficiency heat generation, deliberate heat retention, and an absence of dependence on centralized energy supply chains whose prices are largely outside the control of individual households. That last point is worth considering carefully. One of the vulnerabilities of modern household heating is that it depends on energy markets that can be unpredictable. Natural gas prices, electricity rates, and heating oil costs all fluctuate based on factors that individual families have no influence over. A cold winter combined with supply constraints can push heating bills significantly above what a household has budgeted for, and there is very little that can be done about it in the short term. Amish heating methods, by contrast, are largely insulated from these fluctuations. Wood can be sourced locally. Coal prices in mining regions are relatively stable. Propane and kerosene can be bought in advance when prices are favorable. The overall system is more self-contained and less exposed to the kind of external price shocks that make budgeting for modern heating unpredictable. The durability of the equipment involved is another factor that deserves attention. Modern heating systems are engineered products with defined lifespans. They are designed to function reliably for a certain number of years before components begin to fail and replacement becomes necessary. A masonry heater built into the fabric of a house, a well-maintained coal stove, or a rocket mass heater constructed from durable natural materials does not follow the same pattern. These systems age differently. Proper maintenance extends their functional life far beyond what most manufactured heating equipment can match, and the materials they are made from do not become obsolete or incompatible with newer systems over time. The long-term cost of ownership is therefore significantly lower when viewed across a period of several decades. There is also the question of energy independence. Households that heat their homes using locally sourced wood, coal, or stored propane are not dependent on an uninterrupted supply of grid electricity or natural gas pipeline infrastructure. For most urban and suburban households, this is not a pressing concern under normal conditions. But as energy infrastructure ages and the frequency of weather-related disruptions increases in various parts of the country, the ability to maintain warmth without relying on centralized systems has a value that goes beyond the monthly cost of fuel. None of this is to suggest that wholesale adoption of Amish heating methods is practical or desirable for most modern households. The circumstances are different. Most people do not have the space, the land, or the lifestyle that makes managing a wood supply or installing a masonry heater straightforward. Building regulations, urban density, and the design of existing homes all place real constraints on what is feasible for any given household. But the underlying principles do not require complete adoption to be useful. South-facing windows can be incorporated into new construction or renovation projects. Thermal mass materials can be introduced in modest ways without rebuilding an entire house. Supplemental propane or kerosene heaters can reduce dependence on a primary system during peak cold periods. Each of these steps, taken individually, moves a household in the direction of lower heating costs and greater resilience. The Amish example is useful not because it offers a ready-made solution that everyone can apply directly, but because it demonstrates what is possible when heating a home is approached as a problem to be solved through design, material choice, and behavior rather than simply through spending more on energy. The methods they use have been tested across generations in real living conditions and found to work consistently. That track record is worth taking seriously, whatever the scale at which the lessons are applied.